Okay, today is October 18th, 2011. We're going to go right into lesson 3.2. You guys are on textbook page 134 and your blue notebook. Take the notes down on 141. I asked you guys to define these three terms. Okay, I'm going to quickly recap them. Factored form, which is down here, and our standard form. These are both forms of the exact same quadratic expression. So our equation can be written two different ways. We can have it like this, right, where f of x would be most likely equal to 0. And in this instance is when we factored it. So all it is we're moving from a standard form to a factored form, which is exactly what we did last chapter. We were in our standard form, and we worked on factoring equations. Now, we're going to learn why we learned to factor those things. The reason we factored these is because R and S both represent the zeros of an equation. Okay? So the R and S, in this instance here, are the zeros of an equation. Which means that's where the parabola crosses the x-axis. Okay? So let's say we have a parabola. We're going to do a rough sketch. X Intercepts is exactly what we're talking about. We have our parabola. These would be our 2 points. Say this is our R and this is our S. Okay? These are the X Intercepts. That's what those numbers are going to represent once we factor an equation. Okay? So, we're going to go into working on factoring an equation, especially in a word problem. So we'll go over to the first example. This company, let's call it Mandam. Mandam. That's the company. Mandam. Nope. Mandam. Company's profit is modeled by this equation. Okay? So it's modeled by this equation. Before I even go to graph or factor this equation, let's try to think about it. What would this parabola look like from our first chapter? If our x is negative, which way is it facing, Junior? It's going downwards, okay? So I'm going to put a graph up. Okay, so we know we're going to have some graph that looks something like this, okay? It's going to be facing downwards, and what we're going to be solving for is we're going to be solving for our x-intercepts right now. Okay, those x-intercepts, if this is a company, okay, and this is their profit, what that means is when we're less than this x value, this company will most likely be losing money because we're in the negative region. Okay, we'll assume y is our profit because that's our p at x. P at x represents profit. So once we're after a certain amount on the x value, anywhere along this line, this corresponds to how much profit we are making. And we'll say x is the amount of something we're trying to make. So if I'm at this point, this is where I'll be peak profit. This is where a company will be making the most possible money if this is the amount of the object they're making. And the farther we go along, eventually when they make too much of a product, they start to lose money again. We're going to actually try to go and figure out exactly what numbers those are. So let's say that Mandem, what do they produce, Michael?
Guap.
Guap?
Yeah, guap. It's black pepper money.
Guap. They produce guap, okay? So, we got to figure out how much guap they need to produce to be profitable, what will be their max profit, and then at what point will it be unprofitable for them to produce guap. Okay, so this was their equation that modeled their profit. Now, when we're used to factoring, what's the very first thing we need to do when we're factoring? What type of factoring? Anyone know? There we go. Greatest common factor. Okay, so I quickly look at these. We know this is a negative, and that imaginary number there is 1. So we have a negative 1 as our A. And I'll quickly write, what form is this actually? That's a good question. Okay, we are in what form? Standard. This is our standard form. To figure this out, we need to move from standard form to a factored form. Okay? Now our greatest common factor, from what we were doing before, we actually, the way we did it, we hadn't worked with negative numbers, okay? And the number in front of the x is -1. So I'm actually going to factor out this -1 so that I can work with this equation. When I factor -1 out, I'll be left with positive x squared minus 30x minus 400. You guys okay with that? Okay. From there, I'm going to work with just the brackets, and I'm going to factor the brackets alone. So, if you guys remember what we were doing before, I find the factors of our first term, since that's, an imaginary 1. Factors of 1 are 1 and 1. Factors of 400, we're going to have quite a few.
1, 400, 2, and 200.
All right? Can you keep going?
man.
You got the 4 and 100, 5 and 50.
80? Let's write them all down. Okay, so as we go out these factors, what we're going to realize, eventually I'm going to get to 10 and 40. And if you guys remember, I'm just going to slide these over a little so we have some room. Not what I want to do. There we go. Remember, we're looking for the products of the columns to add together to our middle term, which is -30. So we're going to set these up in the columns.
Oh, I told you the boxes.
These are my first and my second term, so we have a lot of factors here. Remember, these are our first terms. I'm just going to separate these. These will be my first terms. So I know I'm going to be working with those. And in my factored form, we're going to have our two brackets. Make sure that we bring down the -1 outside of the brackets. That doesn't disappear as we're factoring the brackets. That still stays on the outside. Now, instead of going through all of them, somebody already enlightened me to the answer. We know that 1 times 10 and 1 times 40 will give us 10 and 40. And if 40 is a negative number, -40 plus 10 will give me -30. So I'm going to put my terms in here. I have x and x. And remember, we always have to put them in the opposite bracket we multiplied by. So I had 1 times 10, 1 times 40. Because the first terms are the same numbers, it's not going to make any difference. So I'm just going to put them in. We're going to have -10, sorry, positive 10,
No, -40.
and -40. Okay?
No, but don't check there and for -1 and this one.
Okay, so we have our factored form. If you remember, our factored form was f at x was equal to a times x minus, and we had r and s, okay? So our r and s in these equations are 10 and -40,
X intercept.
okay? But to find x intercepts, now if I want to graph this, recall that f at x is technically our y. Or in this occasion, or this equation, we have p at x because we're finding profit. Okay? Now if I want to graph this, I'm actually going to substitute y in for p at x. Okay? So instead of writing in p at x, I'm going to put y is equal to -1 times bracket x plus 10 and bracket x minus 40. That way we can actually go about trying to find our x intercepts. If you guys remember, and I'll put a graph up for you. So, like we said before, we knew we were going to have a parabola facing downwards. And we've discovered it's going to have two x intercepts. Now, what's important about our x and y intercepts? Our x's are referred to as zeros. So these are the zeros of the equation. In other words, this is when the company would make no money. They would make zero profit. So we're trying to find these x intercepts. When I'm finding an x intercept, blank, what's my y value going to be? 0. So for both of our x intercepts, whatever the coordinates are, we're looking for two of them. This will be our x values. Our y value is going to be 0. So what that means is I can take the equation we have above, right here, that we've made, and I can substitute 0 in for y so that I can solve for my x values. Okay? So I'm going to do that on another page. So the equation in our factored form was y is equal to -1. What did we have? X plus 10. X minus 40. Good. Now we said with our x intercepts, Remember again, we're looking for x-intercepts. Y is 0 on an x-intercept. So I'm going to substitute 0 in for y. So I get 0 is equal to negative 1, x plus 10, x minus 40. Now this is where it gets a little confusing. I want you to think of these, or this equation, as having pretty much 3 terms right now. Each of these brackets is 1 term. I need to create a 0 on this side. That's a terrible arrow. There we go. I need to create a 0 on that side. Since these are all multiplied by each other, this is 1 times this bracket, and this bracket times the other bracket. If any of these terms are 0, it's going to cause all of the other 2, or both of the other 2, to also be 0. 0 times anything is 0. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually take these brackets and set them into 0. So we're going to split them up. It's going to become 2 equations now. I'm going to set each bracket equal to 0. So I get 0 is equal to x plus 10, and 0 is equal to x minus 40. This is how we're going to find our actual x-intercepts, okay? Once I've done that, I'm going to solve for x in both equations. So I'm going to drop the brackets. I get 0 is equal to x plus 10. 0 is equal to x minus 40. And I'm going to move 40 and 10 to the other side. When I move 10 over and 40 over, so x is by itself. So in this case, I'm going to get x is equal to negative 10, and x is equal to positive 40. So my 2 x-intercepts are at negative 10, 0, that's one of them. And the other one is 40 and 0, okay? So I'm actually going to plot these points now. Yeah, it's almost like flipping, depending on what the factor it is. So we're going to put a... All right, so remember our coordinates were negative 10, 0, and 40 and 0, okay? We know that we have a parabola. We're going to quickly label this graph. I know that this graph has to reach... Let's make it bigger. Here we go. We know that this graph has to reach 40, so I'm going to go up by increments of 10. So I got 10, 20, 30, 40, 60. Okay? And same when we go the other direction. I'm just going to negative 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. It's technically the exact same. I just didn't write as many numbers in. Okay? So our x-intercepts we discovered, we're at negative 10 and 0. That's 1 point here. And 40 and 0. So we're going to have some parabola. That's all we know about it so far. It's going to look maybe something like this. And what it's saying is that this company, apparently at 0, when it's producing 0, it's making some amount of money. When it produces negative 10, which technically doesn't make much sense. How can we use negative? When it produces negative 10 guam, right? That's what we're producing. Wait, G-U-A-M? Guap, sorry, guap, not guam. And this was profit. Okay? When it produced negative 10 guap, it was making 0. And then when it eventually gets up to 40 guap, it again makes 0. After 40, what would happen? The company would become what? Bankrupt. Well, not bankrupt, but they start losing money. Eventually, it became negative guap. No, they're still making more than 40 guap. More than 40 guap. Okay, so we've graphed the 2 x-intercepts, but I actually want to find out the vertex of this equation. I want to find out exactly where it is so I know how to graph it. Okay, so I'm not technically done my graphing yet. To find a vertex, okay, so vertex, to find the x value of the vertex, so a vertex has an x and a y. The x value of the vertex is equal to r plus s divided by 2. Okay? So we have our r and our s right now. We're going to say r was our negative 10 and s was positive 40. We're going to plug those values in to find the x value of the vertex. So r is negative 10 plus positive 40 divided by 2. Negative 10 and 40 is 30 divided by 2. Our x value of the vertex is 15. So we know the vertex, and there's another part of the parabola. Anyone know what it's called? Axis of symmetry. That wasn't perfect, but is at 15. So we know the axis of symmetry, I know that's not perfect, is at 15 on this graph. We also know that's the x value of the vertex. We just have to find the y value. The y value will be higher. So, in order to find the y value, I'm actually going to take my x value, which is 15, and I'm going to plug it into either the standard form or the factored form of this equation.
As x, right?
As x. Either one will work, and I'm going to show you that either will work. We'll go back to our page. We'll do it on another page. So, our standard form, we had our profit, f at x, was equal to, what was the standard form, guys? Negative x squared, that's it.
Plus 30. Plus 30x. Plus
400. And our standard form was p at x, negative 1, x minus, no, plus 10, x minus 40. Sorry, that's small. I'm going to expand that after. These are our factored and standard form, okay? So this was our standard form, and this was our factored form. Either will work for what we're about to do. So remember, we just discovered that the vertex, the x value was 15. We're looking for the y value. Our y value is our p at x. So I'm going to replace p at x with y equals negative x squared plus 30x plus 400. Yeah, we plug in 15. And y is equal to negative 1, x plus 10, x minus 40. Okay. Now these are two separate equations. Both of them are going to give us the exact same answer. So we're going to split them up. I'm going to plug 15 in for all of the x values, okay, in both equations. So I'll do the left one to start, and then I'll do the right one. So y, which is what we're trying to discover for our vertex, is equal to negative 15 squared plus 30 times 15 plus 400, okay? 15 squared, 225, okay? Now there's a negative sign in front of that, 225, plus 30 times 15 is 450, it's 400. This is negative 225, plus when we add those together we get 850, and oops, 850, subtract 225, 625. So they're making $625. No, guap is what they're producing. They're making $625. We'll say it's in the thousands, $625,000 when they produce 15 or 15,000 guap. We'll say it's in thousands, okay?
Yes.
Isn't that amazing? So,
They're producing money, they're mint.
yeah, they're a mint. We're gonna put into the factor form to show that you get the same answer. 15 plus 10, 15 minus 40. Okay, so we replace both x's with 15. We get 25 multiplied by negative 25. Now, if you guys notice something, what's special about the absolute value of these two numbers?
The same thing.
They're the exact same thing. That's another way you know you're at the vertex. The vertex should be exactly the same distance from the r and the s value. So when you plug it in and you equate those two brackets, you should have the same absolute value, a positive and negative version of it. Okay? So when we go to multiply all these together, it's essentially 25 squared.
625.
Yeah.
We get 625.
No, I know how to do this in my head, sir.
You're amazing.
Side.
So
Stop.
we discovered that the profit part, And now when you make a graph, don't ever do it the way I'm just about to do it here. This is 625. So the vertex is at 15 and 625. This is our x and our y value. So we've put our negative 10 and 0, 40 and 0, and the vertex is 15 and 625. We've graphed our three major points, the vertex and the two zeros, or the X intercepts.
Yeah, that's actually
Homework, do it on page 143 in your blue notebook. You're doing questions 2, 3, 8, 11, 15, 16. So I added 2 and 3.